Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
And Ginny,
I'm so excited.
you're fired.
I
Oh
knew
no,
you were going
maybe
to fire me.
maybe not. Because if I fire you, then I have to just talk all by myself. So that might be too much work for me. So maybe I'll put you on a PIP instead, and we'll just think about it. And then we'll come back and figure out if it makes sense. No, I don't know about that either. I just don't know what to do.
Well, I guess you could find a replacement. Do you have a replacement?
I don't.
Well,
I don't know
you
that
could
anybody
start
else
there.
would want to put up with having to do this with me every week. So that
Well,
could be a problem.
truth be told, it is kind of fun. So people would be missing out, but I don't want to be fired.
Okay. Well, that's fine. I won't fire you.
Okay, great.
You're unfired.
Woohoo!
So we are going to talk about firing, but it's not about firing either one of us. It's about firing employees. And I guess I'll let you set this one up, but it's a question that showed up in an online forum about an underperforming employee. I think that's fair to say.
Yeah.
And an owner trying to figure out what to do about it.
I mean, yeah, the gist of it is that there's an underperforming employee with a terrible attitude who refuses to do work. She gives it back to her manager regularly. She doesn't share information. She hoards stuff. But my friend was like, there's a problem. She needs to be fired, but we don't have an immediate replacement and it will put her work on others. And I was like, okay, but other people are already doing her work, especially if she's giving it back to her manager. Other people are already doing her work. And the way I look at these kinds of things is the team is already frustrated. By the time it gets to you, the team is super frustrated with this human being. They don't want to do their work anymore. They're tired of standing up for them. They're tired of helping out. And so they're looking to you to be the leader. They're looking to you to make the tough decision. And when you waffle like this, they lose respect and trust in you because you're not able to make that decision. So trust me when I say that they would much rather you fire them and take the extra work than to keep going in this manner.
Yeah. And I mean, as we say at the end of every episode, it depends. I think there are things you need to think about here. And there have certainly been occasions where I've held on to employees until I had a replacement because I needed the bandwidth, right?
Sure.
But there's a difference in what you're describing here or what your friend describes where I think of this as a diseased employee, if you will,
Yes.
right? Because they have a bad attitude, which in almost all cases affects the rest of the team.
Yep.
And so it's not that they're just not as productive as they could be, but still get along well and, kind of try their best. We've all had team members, I'm sure, over the years that fall into that category where you'd like to replace them, but they're not doing harm. They're not living up to the potential that you would like to see. Those are cases where I think it can make sense to make sure you have a replacement lined up before you take action.
Sure.
But in a case like this, where you have someone who is actively contributing in a negative way to the business, I am much more a fan of just rip that Band-Aid off and be done with it, because to your point, your team is already looking at you and saying, why aren't you doing something about this?
That's right. Yep. They are. And I think if you can't do this from an HR perspective, but if you polled your team and said, what do you think? They'd all be like, we don't know why she's still here. Like,
Right.
Come on.
Yeah. Please do not treat this like Survivor. Do not take a vote of the team as to whether someone stays or goes. That is
It's a bad idea.
It is
But if you
dereliction of
did,
duty. It may well be illegal or at least
Right. Of all those
problematic.
things.
So
Sure.
just no, don't do that.
But if you did, they would all vote her off the island.
Yes. More often than not, when you terminate an employee, the other team members that you have will be like, oh, finally.
Finally. Yeah. I also think you're right that when you have somebody who's negatively affecting the organization, it's the bad apple that spoils the whole lot, right? So then they start to influence how other people feel. And
Correct.
maybe someone was feeling a little burned out, or maybe somebody was annoyed about something. Well, now they're listening to this person go on and on and on all day long, and that little annoyance becomes something bigger. And all of a sudden you have a bigger cultural issue on your hands than just one terrible employee that you should just rip the Band-Aid off and get rid of.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't make it any more pleasant that to go through it, but it's important and it will help your business overall. One of the other questions that I believe was asked in this particular scenario was, should there be a PIP? Please don't do PIPs. Unless your HR advisor tells you need to do a PIP in order to lay the proper groundwork for whatever the particular scenario is, please don't do them. Let me put it this way. Don't do a PIP anticipating that it's going to have any impact.
Yes.
Because
It's
I can think of
essentially a
maybe
30-day
one
notice.
scenario over the course of my career where a PIP actually worked to turn an employee around.
Yeah, yeah. It's essentially a 30-day notice. It's like, we're giving you 30 days that you're not going to be employed here anymore, is essentially what it is. I agree with you. I've never seen it work.
Yeah. And so if you're doing it for HR protection, fine, go for it. You should absolutely, anytime you're looking at terminating an employee, you should always talk with an HR advisor, employment attorney, whoever it is that you work with, just to make sure that there's not something that you're overlooking, that there's some possible claim there that you need to address carefully and make sure that you dot your T or dot your I's, cross your T's,
Dot your T's and cross
dot
your
your T's
I's.
too. I mean, whatever it takes. So you absolutely want to make sure that you're doing those things correctly and appropriately for the rules and regulations that apply in that particular scenario. But if you are doing it because you think it's going to work, a PIP will not work.
Yep, 100%. I've literally never seen it work. You're exactly right. So I agree. We have an HR leader on our team, and she has us do PIPs, but it is too just she's super, super risk averse and super conservative. So it's, very much to protect the business. And I will say that she has gotten me in a good practice of documenting everything, which as a business owner I was not very good at before. But she has definitely gotten me. So even if you don't have, even if you're not going to do a PIP, I think it's really important to document, conversations that you've had where you've provided critical feedback, or, things like that. Just document, because those are the kinds of things that'll save you in the long run, especially from a risk perspective.
Yeah. I mean, and look, I mean, ultimately you do want to give people a fair chance. And,
Sure.
on occasion, I have run across owners who are a little bit too quick to pull the trigger on getting rid of an employee. Very rare,
I was going to say,
very,
really?
very rare. But but by too quick, I typically mean someone who is in their first few weeks still.
Oh, yeah.
Right. That is when take a pause. I mean, to me, if you're going to part ways with someone that you've just brought on, there has to be a really good reason.
Yeah.
Like it can't be just that they haven't quite met your expectation. I mean, it has to be that there is something dramatic usually in their behavior. I've
Yes.
certainly had some where in their
Yes.
first 60 or 90 days, I've parted company, but it was, I think in every situation, it was because of their behavior and attitude, not because of performance, right? Because performance, honestly, unless someone has completely misrepresented themselves and you've done a very, very poor job of vetting them in advance, most of the time you shouldn't be seeing that dramatic a difference in those first couple of months that you are truly surprised by it. And there still should be room to improve with them. So, but
Yeah.
behaviorally, yes, fine. Then that's a good termination cause for the early stages of employment. But otherwise, most of the time I see owners wait too long to terminate.
Always.
And usually by the time
Always.
that you're even thinking about it, you probably passed the point where you should have done it already.
Yes. Yes, I've been guilty of that myself. I have to tell this story because it fits along with the firing somebody within the first 60 to 90 days. I have a really, really, really close friend who hired somebody, they're remote, hired them without, meeting in person. They did Zoom calls, but the person would never turn on their camera. And the person starts and goes through onboarding and everything. And the first 3 weeks, they're like, this person doesn't seem to be able to do this job that we've hired them to do. And they keep digging and digging. What they learned is that the person that they interviewed was this person's friend who had the experience, and this guy wanted the job. So he had his friend interview for the job. They offered the job thinking that they were, oh, yeah. So this person started, and I mean, I think that's called catfishing. But that's what
It's
happened to
called
them. So
fraud is what it's
it
called.
is
I
called
mean,
fraud. Yeah. So they did fire that person in the first 3 weeks, but to your point, there are situations like that you would do it, but you're right, like, most of the time, people are in their honeymoon stage for the first 6 months at least.
yeah, I mean they're in their honeymoon stage, and or if I've got issues with performance in the early stage, I need to ask myself, am I giving them the support they need, the training they need, the guidance
Right.
they need?
Yes.
Because to miss that badly in a hiring process is somewhat unlikely. It's not impossible, but more often than not, it takes a while before you really get to that point. And you're like, no, this really is not a good fit. But you shouldn't wait too long, and you shouldn't drag it out. Um, if you can find a replacement beforehand, whether that's a contractor who can help fill the gap or something like that, I absolutely encourage that, because you don't want the rest of the team to feel burdened by the termination. But if they're a bad apple, like the one that we described in this scenario, where they are, actively harming things and not simply not living up to their potential, you're better off, even if everybody else has to pick up extra workload for the short term, to
Yes.
part company and move on.
Yes. Yes. Because I think everybody, like, people are understanding for the most part, right? And if they're already feeling this, then relieving them of that stress is more important than them taking on some extra work. And they're probably already taking the work on. So it's not going to be that much different for them, except that they don't have this extra stress of this negative person around all the time.
Yeah, and in some ways, I mean, these are easier situations to deal with the team, because if someone does have this kind of a pervasive bad attitude, it will not come at all as a surprise to their coworkers when they're
Yeah.
terminated. There
Right.
are times where, if it's simply for underperformance, if someone isn't closely enough working with that individual to notice the underperformance, that they might be surprised by it, and that can be more alarming to the team. So, those are scenarios where you have to be more direct with your messaging. In this case, it sounds like everybody would completely understand exactly why this individual was let go.
Yeah.
And so it solves some of that issue.
Yes.
Now, the
Yes.
important thing, anytime you terminate somebody, particularly if there's going to be a workload issue, you have to immediately be able to show your team proactive steps that you're working to address it, because they may be willing to step up in the short term to help fill
Correct.
the void,
Yep.
but they're not going to do that forever. And
Right.
if it looks like you're dragging your feet and just trying to, maybe pad your profit margins by waiting, or even if that's not your intent, if that's the appearance,
Yep.
that can be problematic. So
Yep.
usually what I want to do, if I don't have any kind of a replacement lined up or a contractor who can help, I want to be clear. Here are the steps we're taking. Here's how we're going to try to fill this as soon as reasonably possible, being clear that I'm not just going to hire someone for the sake of hiring somebody, but I'm actively moving forward because I don't want you to be shouldering more of the burden for longer than you have to.
And you brought up a good point, which I think is having a contractor pinch hit, because every single agency owner should have a bench of contractors that they have relationships with, that they've worked with before, that they can bring in and off on and off the bench when necessary. And this is a good reason to bring a contractor off the bench to be able to help you in the interim, if it's 90 days, if it's 6 months, however long it takes, because that will show your team, exactly to your point, that you've done something to help mitigate the workload and their risk, while also giving you all time to interview and hire the right person.
Right. And you also need to be looking at the workload that you're providing to your team, and are there things you can do to relieve the burden of what you're asking them to do for a period of time? Maybe that means that there are internal projects that you've been working on that you want to hit pause on for a few weeks,
Sure.
so that you're not contributing to that
Yep.
overwhelm that they potentially feel. So, be mindful of those things, and think about how can you make it as good as possible for them, given the difficult circumstances they may be facing if they're having to pick up this extra work in the short term.
Yeah. And like I said, always, always, always think about it from the perspective of, am I doing myself as the leader a big injustice because I'm not making this decision? And I
Yep.
think that makes it a little bit easier.
Yep. I mean, bottom line is if you have decided that it's time to move on from a particular employee, figure out how to do it as quickly as possible. There is no good reason to drag it out.
100%. Yes. And every time you do it, you take, it's just like this big weight and you're like, oh, why didn't I do this sooner?
Yep.
Every time. Every time.
Yep. So with that, I guess we'll ask, why didn't we end this episode even sooner?
Oh boy.
No? Oh well. So that will draw to an end this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends.